Okay? Just backwards, sorry. Okay. So then we go to the molecule. Then the molecule joins itself into a larger unity and becomes a one-celled amoeba, let's just say, or a one-celled cell of a tree or a plant, and organizes itself together in a community. And the organization or the unity of all of these elements together allow the community of a living organism like an amoeba or a plant leaf or some very small minute organism. And then the unity of those organisms, us, are the combination, let's just say, of a bunch of different types of amoebas and plant cells and everything, decide that they get unity consciousness, they get together and they form higher forms of life, like an ant or an insect, and it goes on from there, fish, reptiles, all the way up to what we would think would be something very advanced, would be a human being within this consciousness of 365 approximately on the cylinder of evolutionary absolute time within evolution. But to get beyond this universe, a process has to take place. Another unity has to take place. A unity where we discover that we're something larger than just ourselves. We go beyond human beings. As, say, the molecule goes beyond being a molecule, it goes into being a one-celled living organism. Or the one-celled living organism goes beyond just its own organism and goes into a community of organisms, becomes a real thing. And this is all demonstrated in numbers. It's been known by those who reach a level of consciousness and have evolved on before us, evolved out of humanoidness onto higher states of, let's just call them angels, or they go on to gods, and then go from gods to sons, or whatever it be. It doesn't really make any difference what you evolve onto. It's just something larger. As your consciousness becomes larger, you join in a unified evolutionary process that makes you larger than just your individual self. And every one of you will probably notice this just from one lifetime's experience. You'll go around when you're a little kid being really concerned about yourself, and as you get older and more conscious and the more intelligent you become, you see what an integral part you are of the whole. And then as you lose yourself, you find yourself, as the old story goes. As you lose your consciousness of yourself, you become part of a larger whole, part of that thing. And so this mummification process is that, exactly, is when one reaches a consciousness that goes beyond, let's just say, human consciousness, and becomes larger than that, they decide to go through a process called mummification. Now everybody, except a very few people, a very minute amount of people, ever reach that consciousness now in our time of being mummified. It's not necessary for them, because most of them are just caught up orbiting on themselves. And so there's nothing wrong with that either. That's all okay and everything. But we're telling them this story about to the people who do reach a higher level of consciousness, so they know what this unity consciousness is and what takes place and what is necessary to take place for it to happen. Everything is unnatural law. It just doesn't happen by accident. Everything happens exactly. It's very scientific. It's just like this additive series here, as we go from one building series to the next series. It's like this shell I've got back here, and I don't know what kind of shell this is called, but if Jim would zoom in on the shell real closely. Have you got a real good clear close-up on it? I'm not going to move. I'm going to try not to move. Have you got it? Okay, if you'll notice how it builds from the very center and it works itself out. Now if you'll notice, in there's a little fine line, okay, right there, that goes around and follows itself all the way around. That is similar to the line down the cylinder of evolutionary absolute time, that very fine line that bonds itself in there. Am I holding it still enough? Okay. Now, it's on a swirl. It's called a logarithmic swirl of phi, or this exact same series of numbers here. Everything in nature is designed on this. Now, it would be very difficult for this shell to be the way that it was if we took all the center part of the shell out to make the outer part. The outer part is built upon the center part of the shell. Its structure is from there. And for it to enlarge itself, it builds upon itself, but it becomes larger and more and more and more and more and more as it goes out. Now, to briefly describe mummification, make this real quick and clear as possible on this videotape, and this has to be done in great length. In discussions, it probably takes days sometimes to get into the detail of it, but I'm just going to go over it briefly so that people can touch on it, maybe stimulate their consciousness and get an idea of what it's about. To be able to get out of this universe, you cannot take the center of the shell out of it to the next universe, or the universe collapses, just like the little shell I showed you. So you have to maintain the integrity of the center of the shell. And so for your identity, and they speak of this in the hieroglyphs, it's called the doubling of the identity, or the doubling of the ka. And during the process of mummification, your ka, which is part of what religionists today would call your soul or your spirit, has to be doubled. And it shows it very identically in the hieroglyphs, where there's one soul inside of you, and through this mummification process, a duplicate soul is made. It's like cloning a cell within your body. If you take one cell, what it does is it takes the DNA message out of it, which is also on the logarithmic swirl of Phi, splits itself up and goes over and starts a new cell identical to the original cell and makes another cell. Okay? It doesn't destroy the old cell and just make a new one. The old cell is maintained, so it has to maintain the integrity of the body for the thing to grow large and become part of a whole unified thing. Yes?
Just the ka is doubled?
Don't worry about all the details right now, okay? We'll get into all the details later. You could spend years talking about this. I'm trying to get a real generalized discussion of it. So, for us to be able to maintain the integrity of the cosmos, we can't take the soul out of the universe. It has to be there because it is part of this universe, that level of consciousness of the soul. But it can be doubled and it can go on to make something larger, like the shell. The center of it is still there, but the larger part of it becomes something other than the center part of it. But the center part is still there. You don't take it away. Now, it doesn't mean that the center part is bad, does it? And it doesn't mean that the outer part is good. They're just different from each other. But for the integrity of this thing to be, the center has to be there still. Or this highway line that it grows on or expands on is demonstrated in this shell. Everybody wants to come look closely at this after class. And that is this center line demonstrated here in a single-dimensional drawing, which is called the cylinder of evolutionary absolute time. So when a person dies, when they reach a particular state of consciousness, they choose automatically to be mummified. It's not something you're told to do, or that the government passes a law that says everybody's got to be mummified, and or this way. Right now, what takes place is when you die, either you're cremated, you're stuck in the ground, your body rots, and you get reincarnated down on this planet, or someplace within this universe. Okay? Someplace, and it doesn't make any difference. You get reincarnated maybe in a higher form of life. You came from an amoeba to a humanoid, and you may continue on to evolve into a different form of a humanoid, different higher forms of humanoids, until you reach a point where you realize and you understand what mummification is all about, or the doubling of this identity to be able to go beyond something other than what is in this universe.